The emergency beacon screamed across 17 star systems, its digital voice cracking with desperation. Ambassador Zethkari of the Galactic Council pressed his six-fingered hands against the communication console, his scaled face twisted with worry. The message played again, each word cutting deeper than the last.
This is Captain Veltar of the Hegemony science vessel Quantum Dawn. We are trapped in the Void Sector, coordinates 447.882.991. Our ship is failing. Life support critical. 17 crew members aboard. Please, anyone who receives this transmission, we need immediate assistance. The Council has abandoned us. They say the Void Sector is too dangerous. They say no rescue is worth the risk. We have perhaps 48 hours before total system failure. If anyone out there has courage where the Council has none, please help us. The transmission ended with a burst of static.
Zethkari stared at the dark screen, shame burning in his chest like acid.
The Galactic Council had indeed voted to abandon the Quantum Dawn. Unanimously.
Every species represented, from the wise Altarians to the cautious Velshanti, had agreed that the Void Sector was a death trap.
No rescue mission could succeed there. The Void Sector earned its name honestly.
It was a region of space where reality itself seemed broken.
Gravity fields shifted without warning. Energy weapons failed randomly. Navigation systems became unreliable.
Ships that entered rarely emerged, and those that did often brought back crew members changed in ways that defied explanation. The sector had claimed hundreds of vessels over the centuries. The Council's official policy was simple: avoid it entirely.
But 17 lives hung in the balance. 17 beings with families, dreams, hopes for the future. And the Council had written them off as acceptable losses.
Zethkari had served on the Council for 30 years. He had witnessed wars that consumed entire star systems, plagues that wiped out civilizations, and natural disasters that rendered worlds uninhabitable. Through it all, the Council maintained its careful balance of pragmatism and compassion. They saved who they could, when they could, but they never risked the many for the few.
Today felt different. Today, the pragmatism felt like cowardice.
The communication array chimed softly. Another transmission was coming through, this one on a frequency the Council rarely monitored.
Zethkari frowned and switched to the incoming signal. Galactic Council, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran vessel Defiant Thunder. We received the distress call from the Quantum Dawn.
We're 47 hours out from the Void Sector if we push our engines hard.
Please confirm the status of any ongoing rescue operations so we can coordinate our approach. Zethkari's breath caught. Humans. Of course it was humans.
The Terran Republic was the newest member of the Galactic Council, having achieved interstellar flight only 2 centuries ago. In cosmic terms, they were infants, barely crawling, while ancient races like his own had been walking among the stars for millennia. Most Council members viewed humans as amusing but irrelevant, a species too young to contribute meaningfully to galactic affairs.
But humans had one trait that both fascinated and terrified the older races: they were absolutely, relentlessly, stupidly brave.
Where other species calculated risks and weighed probabilities, humans simply acted. They charged into burning buildings to save strangers. They dove into turbulent seas to rescue drowning swimmers. They threw themselves between predators and prey without thought for their own safety.
It was simultaneously admirable and insane.
And now they were volunteering to enter the Void Sector.
Zethkari activated his personal communication channel. Captain Chen, this is Ambassador Zethkari of the Galactic Council.
I must inform you that the Council has voted not to authorize a rescue mission to the Void Sector. The region is considered too dangerous for any vessel to safely navigate. There was a pause before Captain Chen responded. When she spoke again, her voice carried an edge that made Zethkari's scales prickle with unease.
Ambassador, with respect, I didn't ask whether the Council authorized a rescue mission. I asked about the status of ongoing operations. Since you've told me there are none, that means the field is clear for us to proceed. Captain Chen, you don't understand the dangers involved.
The Void Sector has claimed hundreds of ships. Even our most advanced vessels with the finest crews have vanished without a trace. Your ship, while impressive for human technology, lacks the sophisticated systems and experienced crew necessary to navigate such hazards.
Another pause.
This time, when Captain Chen spoke, There was something in her voice that Zeth Carey had heard before in human communications. Something that always preceded acts of spectacular bravery or spectacular stupidity.
Ambassador, 17 beings are going to die if someone doesn't help them. The fact that it's dangerous doesn't change that. The fact that others have failed doesn't change that. The only thing that matters is that they need help, and we can provide it. We're going in. The transmission ended.
Zeth Carey stared at the communication panel, a mixture of admiration and horror churning in his stomach.
The humans were actually going to do it.
They were going to charge into the most dangerous region of known space on a rescue mission that every expert in the galaxy had deemed impossible. He thought about Captain Veltar and his 17 crew members slowly dying in the black void of space while their ship failed around them. He thought about the Council's cold calculation, the way they had written off those lives as acceptable losses. And he thought about Captain Sarah Chen, who had heard a cry for help and responded without hesitation. Zeth Carey made a decision that would haunt or honor him for the rest of his life. He opened a communication channel to the Defiant Thunder.
Captain Chen, this is Ambassador Zeth Carey.
I'm transmitting all available data on the void sector to your ship.
Navigation charts, sensor readings, reports from previous expeditions. It's not much, but it might help. Thank you, Ambassador. We appreciate any assistance you can provide. Captain, may I ask why?
Why would you risk your ship and crew for beings you've never met? The response came immediately, as if Captain Chen had been expecting the question.
Because they asked for help, Ambassador. Sometimes that's all the reason you need.
Over the next several hours, Zeth Carey monitored the Defiant Thunder's progress through the communication network. The human ship was moving faster than Council regulations typically allowed, pushing its engines beyond safe parameters to reach the void sector in time. Other ships in the area reported unusual energy signatures as the Terran vessel passed, evidence that they were running their systems at dangerous levels. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss the humans' unauthorized rescue mission. Representatives from dozens of species filled the Great Chamber, their voices rising in a cacophony of concern and criticism. This is exactly why humans are unfit for Council membership, declared Speaker Yorthani of the Velshanti Assembly. They lack the wisdom to recognize impossible situations. They will lose their ship, their crew, and any chance of rescuing the Quantum Dawn. The humans' reckless behavior endangers not just themselves, but potentially any future rescue operations, added Councillor Merthak of the Altarian Consortium.
If their ship is lost in the void sector, we may be obligated to mount an additional rescue mission.
The debate continued for hours, but Zeth Carey found himself unable to focus on the political maneuvering. His attention kept drifting to the tracking display that showed the Defiant Thunder's position. The human ship was now only 6 hours from the edge of the void sector. As if summoned by his thoughts, his communication panel chimed with an incoming transmission.
Ambassador Zeth Carey, this is Captain Chen. We're approaching the void sector boundary.
Our sensors are detecting the gravitational anomalies you warned us about, but we're adapting our approach.
We wanted to thank you for the data you provided. It's already helped us avoid 2 potentially catastrophic navigation errors. Captain, are you certain you want to proceed?
Even with our data, the chances of success are extremely low.
No one would think less of you if you turned back now. Ambassador, my great-grandfather once told me something that stuck with me my whole life. He said that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. We're afraid. We'd be stupid not to be.
But those 17 souls in the Quantum Dawn are counting on someone to be brave enough to try.
If not us, then who?
The transmission ended, and Zeth Carey found himself thinking about his own great-grandfather, a military commander who had died defending a colony world from raiders. His ancestor had faced impossible odds and fought anyway, not because he was guaranteed to win, but because the alternative was unthinkable.
When had the galaxy lost that spirit? When had calculated pragmatism replaced righteous fury? When had the preservation of the self become more important than the protection of others? The Defiant Thunder crossed into the void sector, and immediately the tracking sensors began registering anomalous readings.
The human ship's position flickered on the display, sometimes showing it in one location, sometimes another, as if the fabric of space itself was uncertain where the vessel belonged. For 3 hours, there was no communication from the rescue ship. The Council continued its debate, with several members now calling for sanctions against the Terran Republic for authorizing such a reckless mission. But Zeth Carey knew the truth that the other council members were ignoring: the Terran government hadn't authorized this mission. Captain Chan and her crew had chosen to respond on their own, driven by nothing more than an innate compulsion to help those in need. Then, at hour mark 38 since the original distress call, the communication array exploded with activity.
This is Captain Chan of the Defiant Thunder. We have successfully located the Quantum Dawn and established a docking connection.
All 17 crew members are alive and being transferred to our ship. The Quantum Dawn's systems are too badly damaged to attempt to salvage, but the crew is safe. We're beginning our exit from the Void Sector now. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives who had been condemning the humans moments before now sat in stunned silence. Several junior aides rushed between the seated diplomats, confirming the transmission and verifying that it wasn't some elaborate hoax.
But Zeth Carey was already moving.
He rushed from the chamber to his personal office, where he opened a priority communication channel to the Defiant Thunder.
Captain Chan, this is Ambassador Zeth Carey. The entire council has heard your transmission. How did you manage to navigate the Void Sector? What enabled your success where so many others have failed?
Captain Chan's voice came through clearly, though there was a note of exhaustion that spoke to the stress of the last several hours.
Ambassador, we didn't do anything revolutionary. We just refused to give up. When our navigation systems failed, we used manual piloting. When our energy weapons went offline, we rerouted power from non-essential systems.
When the gravitational fields threatened to tear our ship apart, we adjusted our structural integrity fields and pushed forward anyway. The Void Sector is dangerous, but it's not magical.
It's just another challenge that requires adaptation and determination.
But, Captain, our analysis indicated that the sector's anomalies made successful navigation virtually impossible. Ambassador, with respect, your analysis was based on the assumption that failure was inevitable. We approached the situation with the assumption that success was possible, and we kept trying different solutions until we found ones that worked.
Sometimes that makes all the difference.
Over the next several hours, as the Defiant Thunder made its way out of the Void Sector with all 17 rescued crew members, Zeth Carey reflected on what he had witnessed. The humans hadn't succeeded because they had superior technology or greater expertise. They had succeeded because they had refused to accept that failure was inevitable.
The galaxy was full of ancient races with millennia of accumulated wisdom.
They had learned to calculate risks, to weigh probabilities, to make rational decisions based on available data. But, somewhere in all that wisdom, they had lost something essential: the simple, furious refusal to abandon those in need.
The humans had that fury.
When they heard a cry for help, they didn't calculate the odds of success. They didn't debate the political ramifications or worry about the cost-benefit analysis. They simply acted, driven by a moral imperative that transcended rational thought. As the Defiant Thunder finally cleared the Void Sector and began its journey back to civilized space, Zeth Carey made another decision. He activated his personal log and began to record his thoughts about what he had witnessed.
Personal log, Ambassador Zeth Carey, date index 4891.7. Today I witnessed something that I believe will be remembered as a defining moment in galactic history.
When 17 souls cried out for help in the most dangerous region of known space, every advanced civilization in the galaxy calculated the odds and decided that rescue was impossible.
Every civilization except one.
The humans, the youngest and supposedly least capable of our member species, heard the same cry for help and responded with immediate action.
They didn't debate or deliberate. They didn't form committees or commission studies.
They simply pointed their ship toward danger and flew toward it at maximum speed.
Some will say the humans were lucky.
Others will claim they were foolish. But I believe they were something else entirely: they were righteous. In a galaxy that has grown comfortable with acceptable losses and calculated risks, the humans retain something we older races have forgotten. They retain the capacity for righteous fury in the face of injustice. Perhaps it's time for the rest of us to remember what that feels like. The Defiant Thunder was still 2 days away from the nearest star base, but already the story of their rescue mission was spreading through the communication networks. Ships throughout the sector were requesting details about how the humans had navigated the Void Sector.
Military commanders were analyzing their approach. Scientists were reviewing their technical solutions. But Zethkari suspected that the most important lesson of the day couldn't be found in technical specifications or tactical analyses. The most important lesson was simpler and more profound. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do, and the only way to succeed is to refuse to accept the possibility of failure. The humans had reminded the galaxy of a fundamental truth that the older races had forgotten in their pursuit of wisdom and caution. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of fear. And sometimes, just sometimes, that fury-driven courage is exactly what the universe needs. As night fell across the council station, Zethkari stood at his office window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 17 beings were alive because a human captain had heard their cry for help and decided that abandoning them was simply not an option. Tomorrow, the council would debate the implications of the day's events. They would analyze the human success and try to quantify what had made it possible. But tonight, Zethkari was content to simply feel grateful that in a universe full of ancient wisdom and careful calculation, there was still room for the simple, furious courage of those who refused to let others suffer when they had the power to help. 3 weeks after the Void Sector rescue, Captain Sarah Chen stood before the full assembly of the Galactic Council, her dress uniform crisp and her expression carefully neutral. The great chamber stretched out before her like an amphitheater, filled with representatives from 47 different species. Their eyes, in whatever form they took, were fixed on her with a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and suspicion. Ambassador Zethkari had warned her about this moment. The council wasn't simply going to thank her and send her on her way. They wanted answers. They wanted to understand how a species barely 2 centuries into space travel had succeeded where millennia-old civilizations had failed. More importantly, they wanted to ensure that humanity's approach wouldn't destabilize the careful balance of galactic politics. Captain Chen, Speaker Yorthani's voice echoed through the chamber, his Velshanti vocal cords producing harmonics that made the words seem to come from multiple directions at once. The Council wishes to formally acknowledge your successful rescue of the Quantum Dawn's crew. However, we must also address the concerning implications of your unauthorized mission. Sarah kept her face expressionless, though internally she bristled at the word unauthorized. No one had authorized the mission because no one had been willing to try it. There was a difference between lacking permission and acting against orders, but she doubted the council would appreciate that distinction. Thank you, Speaker Yorthani. My crew and I were honored to assist beings in distress. We acted according to the fundamental principles that guide all civilized species, the preservation of life and the duty to aid those in need. A ripple of movement passed through the assembly. Several representatives leaned forward in their seats, while others exchanged glances with their neighbors. Sarah realized she had just challenged them, politely but unmistakably. By invoking fundamental principles, she was suggesting that their decision to abandon the Quantum Dawn had violated their own stated values. Captain Chen, Councillor Merthak of the Altarian Consortium spoke next, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. While we appreciate your intentions, your actions have created a dangerous precedent. If every species begins attempting rescue missions in hazardous regions without council approval, we risk losing countless more lives in failed attempts. Sarah had anticipated this argument. During the flight back from the Void Sector, she had discussed it extensively with her senior officers. They had debated the political ramifications, the potential consequences, and the likelihood that their success would be viewed as dangerous rather than inspiring. Councillor Merthak, with respect, the dangerous precedent was already established when the council declared 17 lives to be acceptable losses. My crew and I simply demonstrated that the council's assessment was incorrect. The Void Sector can be navigated. Rescue operations can succeed. The only question is whether we're willing to try. The chamber erupted in a dozen different forms of agitation. Some representatives chittered or clicked in their species' equivalent of nervous energy. Others began rapid conversations in their native languages. A few simply stared at Sarah with expressions that ranged from shock to admiration to fury. Speaker Yorthani called for order, his harmonic voice rising above the chaos. When relative quiet returned, he directed his attention back to Sarah. Captain, you speak of willingness to try as if it were a simple matter. But, the Council's decisions are based on careful analysis of risk versus reward. We have the responsibility to consider not just immediate casualties, but long-term consequences. If every rescue mission were attempted regardless of risk, we would lose far more lives than we saved. Sarah nodded slowly, acknowledging the point while preparing to challenge its foundation. Speaker, I understand the logic of your position. Risk assessment is crucial for any responsible organization.
But I would suggest that the Council's analysis was flawed, not because of mathematical error, but because of faulty assumptions. She paused, looking around the chamber to ensure she had everyone's attention. The Council assumed that the void sector was impassable because previous expeditions had failed. But those expeditions failed because they approached the sector with the expectation of failure. They entered with backup plans and exit strategies that prioritized their own survival over mission success. We entered with one goal: bring those 17 people home. That difference in mindset made all the difference in outcome.
Councillor Thexare of the Zephyrian hegemony, a species known for their philosophical approach to governance, stirred in her crystalline form. Captain Chen, are you suggesting that the Council's caution is misguided? That careful planning is counterproductive? Not at all, Councillor. I'm suggesting that there's a difference between careful planning and predetermined failure. When you enter a dangerous situation convinced that success is impossible, you've already lost. When you enter convinced that success is necessary, you find ways to make it possible. Sarah gestured toward the great display screen behind the speaker's podium, where technical readouts from the rescue mission were still visible. Our success in the void sector wasn't due to superior technology or special knowledge. We used the same basic principles that any competent crew would use: adapt to changing conditions, maintain focus on the primary objective, and refuse to give up until the mission is complete. The difference was that we never considered failure an acceptable option. Ambassador Zethkari, who had been silent throughout the proceedings, finally spoke.
Captain, what you described sounds admirable in principle, but surely you must acknowledge the risks involved. What if your ship had been lost? What if your crew had been killed? Would the rescue of 17 beings justify the deaths of your entire crew? Sarah had wrestled with this question during many sleepless nights since the mission. It was the core philosophical challenge that separated human thinking from the galactic norm: when was risk acceptable, and who had the right to make that decision? Ambassador, my crew knew the risks before we entered the void sector. Every one of them volunteered for the mission after being fully briefed on the dangers involved. They made an informed choice to risk their lives for the lives of others. That's not reckless endangerment, it's heroism. She took a breath and continued. But, to answer your question directly, if we had failed, if we had lost our ship and crew in the attempt, it still would have been the right thing to do. Because the alternative was to allow 17 innocent beings to die when we had the capability to help them. The math isn't complicated. Action with risk is better than inaction with certainty of loss. The chamber fell silent. Sarah could sense that her words had struck something deep in the assembled representatives, something they weren't entirely comfortable confronting. She pressed her advantage. The question isn't whether rescue missions are risky. Of course they're risky. The question is whether we're willing to accept risk in service of our highest values. The Council claims to value all sentient life, but, when that value was tested, it was found wanting. Speaker Yorthani's harmonics took on a sharper edge. Captain, you make serious accusations. The Council's commitment to preserving life is beyond question. Then, why were 17 lives declared expendable? Why was no rescue attempted until humans decided to act? If the Council truly values all life, then every life should be worth the risk of saving. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah realized she had crossed a line from explanation into accusation, from defending her actions to challenging the fundamental assumptions that governed galactic civilization. But she also realized that crossing that line was necessary. The galaxy needed to confront the uncomfortable truth about its own values. Finally, Councillor Merthak spoke, his ancient voice heavy with centuries of accumulated caution. Captain Chen, you present a compelling argument, but you overlook a crucial factor: scale. Individual acts of heroism are admirable, but governance requires broader perspective. If the Council authorized dangerous rescue missions for every distress call, we would lose countless lives and ships. The needs of the many must outweigh the needs of the few. Sarah nodded respectfully, but her response was swift and pointed. Counselor, that philosophy assumes a false choice. You're suggesting that we must choose between reckless endangerment and callous abandonment. But there's a third option: competent courage. Train better crews, develop better equipment, create better protocols. Don't abandon people because rescue is difficult, make rescue less difficult. She gestured again toward the technical displays.
Our mission succeeded because we prepared for success, not failure. We studied the available data, modified our equipment for the specific challenges we would face, and drilled our crew on emergency procedures. We didn't rush blindly into danger, we approached danger with intelligence and determination.
Representative Cthara of the Insectoid Collective, her compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights, clicked her mandibles, and what Sarah had learned was a sign of consideration. Captain Chen, your words suggest that previous rescue missions failed due to inadequate preparation rather than inherent impossibility. Do you truly believe that the void sector can be routinely navigated with proper techniques? Sarah considered her response carefully. This was the moment where her answer could change galactic policy or brand her as dangerously overconfident. Representative Cthara, I believe that any challenge can be overcome with sufficient determination and proper preparation. The void sector is dangerous, but it's not magical. It follows physical laws, even if they're laws we don't fully understand. With careful study and innovative approaches, what seems impossible today can become routine tomorrow. The chamber buzzed with activity as representatives consulted with their advisors and each other. Sarah waited patiently, knowing that her fate and possibly the fate of human involvement in galactic affairs hung in the balance. Speaker Yorthani called for order once again. Captain Chen, the Council will consider your words carefully. However, we must also address the immediate consequences of your actions. Your unauthorized mission has created political complications that extend beyond questions of rescue protocol. Sarah frowned slightly. Speaker, what political complications? Captain, your success has inspired other species to question the Council's authority. 3 different worlds have announced their intention to create independent rescue services, operating outside Council oversight. 2 military factions have declared that they will no longer recognize Council restrictions on dangerous missions. Your demonstration of individual initiative has undermined the collective decision-making process that maintains galactic stability. The weight of unintended consequences settled on Sarah's shoulders. She had acted to save 17 lives, but her actions had apparently threatened the political structure that governed billions of beings across dozens of star systems. Speaker, I never intended to challenge the Council's authority. My crew and I simply responded to a distress call that no one else was answering. Intentions are irrelevant, Captain. Results are what matter. And the result is that your actions have called into question the fundamental principle of collective governance that has maintained peace in this galaxy for over 3,000 years. Sarah felt the weight of history pressing down on her. She had never wanted to become a political figure or a symbol of revolution. She had simply wanted to save lives. But, apparently, in a galaxy governed by careful consensus and calculated risk, the simple act of refusing to abandon those in need was inherently revolutionary. Speaker, if the Council's authority depends on preventing individual acts of courage, then, perhaps that authority needs to be questioned. Good governance shouldn't require the suppression of moral action. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and she immediately knew she had said something that couldn't be taken back. The chamber erupted in chaos as representatives shouted in dozens of different languages, their voices creating a cacophony that reflected the political storm her words had unleashed. As Speaker Yorthani struggled to restore order, Sarah realized that her simple rescue mission had become something much larger. She had accidentally started a revolution, not through violence or political maneuvering, but through the simple demonstration that individual courage could succeed where collective caution had failed. The galaxy was about to discover whether its ancient systems of governance could adapt to accommodate the furious determination of those who refused to accept that some lives were expendable. And Sarah Chen, a human captain who had simply answered a distress call, found herself at the center of that transformation whether she wanted to be or not. 6 months after Captain Chen's appearance before the Galactic Council, the political landscape of known space was transforming in ways no one had anticipated. Ambassador Zeth Carey stood in his private office aboard the Council station, watching news feeds from across the galaxy with a mixture of fascination and concern. On his primary display, a reporter from the Altarian News Network was covering the latest developments in what media outlets had begun calling the independence movement. This is correspondent Velfani reporting from the Kepler sector, where the Colonial Defense Force has just completed their 3rd successful rescue operation in the notorious Maelstrom Nebula. Following the human model demonstrated in the Void sector, the CDF has developed new protocols that prioritize mission success over crew safety, resulting in a 90% rescue success rate in previously impossible situations. Zeth Carey switched to another feed. This one showed Admiral Korath of the warrior clans addressing a massive gathering on the military world of Thanagar Prime. For too long, we have allowed fear to dictate our actions. The humans have shown us that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. Today, the warrior clans announce our withdrawal from Council Military Command. We will no longer be bound by protocols that prioritize political convenience over moral necessity. The ambassador closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. What had started as one human captain's refusal to abandon a distressed ship had somehow metastasized into a galaxy-wide challenge to established authority. Dozens of species were questioning the Council's risk-averse policies. Military units were declaring independence from Council oversight. Rescue organizations were forming outside official channels. And, at the center of it all, humanity was emerging as something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that inspired others simply by refusing to accept limitations. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. Zethkari opened the channel to find Captain Sarah Chen's face on his screen. She looked tired, older somehow than she had 6 months ago, but her eyes still held the fierce determination that had driven her into the void sector. Ambassador Zethkari, thank you for taking my call. I need to speak with the Council. Captain, the Council has been reluctant to grant you another audience. Your last appearance created significant political complications. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Ambassador, those complications are exactly why I need to speak with them. I've been monitoring the situation across the galaxy. Movements claiming to follow the human example are springing up everywhere, and some of them are heading in dangerous directions. Zethkari frowned. What do you mean? I mean that some groups are using our rescue mission as justification for actions that go far beyond reasonable risk-taking. The Crimson Fleet has started attacking Council patrols in the name of liberation from bureaucratic oppression. The Frontier Alliance is declaring entire sectors off-limits to Council authority. People are taking the wrong lessons from what we did. The ambassador leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah's face. And, what lesson did you intend for them to take? That sometimes you have to risk everything to save others. Not that authority itself is evil, or that all rules should be broken, or that violence is the answer to political disagreement. We saved 17 lives by being willing to face danger, not by starting a revolution. But, Captain, that's exactly what you did start. Your actions have called into question the fundamental assumptions that have governed galactic civilization for millennia. Whether you intended it or not, you've become a symbol of rebellion against established order. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Zethkari could see the weight of unintended consequences pressing down on her shoulders. Ambassador, I need to address the Council. If my actions are being misinterpreted, then I need to clarify what they actually meant. I need to help distinguish between righteous courage and reckless rebellion. Zethkari considered the request. The Council was already dealing with a dozen different political crises inspired by the human rescue mission. Adding Sarah's voice to the mix could either calm the situation or inflame it further. Captain, I'll arrange for you to address the Council. But, I must warn you, the political situation has become extremely volatile. Several member species are threatening to withdraw from the Council entirely if human influence continues to grow. Others are demanding that humanity be expelled for destabilizing galactic governance. Then, it's even more important that I speak with them. The galaxy doesn't need a revolution, Ambassador. It needs evolution. And, sometimes that means having difficult conversations. 3 days later, Sarah stood once again before the Galactic Council Assembly, but this time the atmosphere was markedly different. The chamber buzzed with tension, and several seats that had been filled during her previous appearance were now empty, their occupants having withdrawn from council participation in protest. Speaker Yorthani's harmonics carried notes of strain and frustration. Captain Chen, the council has granted you this audience against the advice of several member species. The situation across the galaxy has become increasingly unstable since your last appearance. Many hold you responsible for the chaos that has followed. Sarah nodded gravely. Speaker, I accept responsibility for the consequences of my actions. But, I want to address what I believe is a fundamental misunderstanding of what those actions represented. She gestured toward the display showing news feeds from across the galaxy, where various independence movements and rebel factions continued their activities. 6 months ago, my crew and I entered the Void Sector to rescue 17 people. We succeeded because we were willing to risk our lives for others and because we refused to accept that failure was inevitable.
That's the lesson I want the galaxy to learn from our mission.
She paused, looking directly at Speaker Yorthani.
The lesson is not that authority is evil.
It's not that rules should be broken casually. It's not that violence is the solution to political disagreement.
The lesson is that moral courage sometimes requires individual action, even when institutions are reluctant to act.
Representative Kthara of the Insectoid Collective clicked her mandibles sharply. Captain Chan, your distinction between moral courage and rebellion seems arbitrary. The groups claiming to follow your example would argue that their actions are also morally necessary. Sarah had anticipated this challenge. Representative Kthara, there's a crucial difference between what my crew did and what these rebel groups are doing. We acted to save lives that were in immediate danger.
We didn't attack anyone, we didn't declare war on authority, and we didn't try to impose our will on others. We simply responded to a distress call that no one else was answering.
She turned to address the full assembly. The groups that are committing violence in my name have forgotten the most important part of our mission. We were trying to save people, not hurt them. The moment you use violence against innocents or attack legitimate authority, you've stopped following the human example and started following your own agenda.
Councillor Merthak leaned forward in his ancient chair.
Captain, your words sound reasonable, but the practical effect remains the same. Your demonstration that individual action can succeed where institutional action fails has undermined confidence in established governance. How do you propose to remedy this situation?
Sarah took a deep breath.
This was the moment she had been preparing for during the entire journey to the council station. Counselor, I propose that the council doesn't need to remedy the situation.
It needs to adapt to it.
The galaxy has learned that individual courage can accomplish things that collective caution cannot. Instead of fighting that lesson, the council should embrace it. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs and agitated conversations.
Sarah waited for quiet before continuing.
I'm not suggesting that the council abandon its role or that collective governance should be replaced by individual action. I'm suggesting that the council should create formal mechanisms for individual initiative within the framework of collective oversight.
Ambassador Zethkari spoke for the first time during the session.
Captain, could you be more specific about what such mechanisms would look like?
Certainly, Ambassador.
The Council could establish a rapid response corps, composed of volunteers from member species who are willing to undertake high-risk rescue missions. These volunteers would operate under Council authority but with much greater latitude for individual decision-making than standard Council forces. She warmed to her theme, her voice taking on the passionate edge that had driven her into the Void Sector. The Corps would have access to the best equipment and training that the galaxy can provide, but they would also have the authority to act quickly in emergency situations without waiting for full Council approval. They would be accountable for their actions, but they would also be empowered to take risks that standard Council protocols don't permit.
Speaker Yorthani's harmonics shifted to a more thoughtful tone.
Captain, you're essentially proposing to institutionalize the kind of individual courage that your mission demonstrated.
Exactly, Speaker.
Instead of treating individual courage as a threat to collective governance, the Council should recognize it as a valuable supplement to collective governance. There will always be situations where immediate action is more important than careful deliberation. The galaxy needs people who are willing and able to respond to those situations.
Representative Thexare of the Zephyrian hegemony stirred in her crystalline form.
Captain Chen, this proposal seems reasonable in theory, but how would such a corps maintain accountability while preserving the individual initiative that you claim is essential?
Representative, the key is to focus accountability on results rather than methods.
A rapid response corps member who saves lives should be celebrated, regardless of how many protocols they had to bend to achieve success. A corps member who causes unnecessary casualties should be held accountable, regardless of how carefully they followed established procedures. Sarah paused, then added with quiet intensity. The current system holds people accountable for following rules, even when following those rules means abandoning people in need. I'm proposing a system that holds people accountable for saving lives, even when saving those lives requires breaking rules.
The chamber fell silent as the representatives absorbed the implications of what Sarah was suggesting.
She was proposing a fundamental shift in how the galaxy balanced individual initiative with collective responsibility. Councillor Merthak spoke slowly, his ancient voice carrying the weight of millennia of careful governance. Captain, what you propose is essentially a return to the Age of Heroes, when individual champions took action based on personal conviction rather than collective decision.
That age ended because it led to chaos and conflict. Sarah nodded respectfully. Counselor, I understand the concern. But, I would argue that the Age of Heroes ended because it lacked institutional support and accountability. Individual champions became warlords because there was no framework to channel their courage toward constructive ends. I'm proposing to create that framework. She gestured toward the newsfeed still playing on the chamber's displays. The current situation proves that individual courage hasn't disappeared, it's just been suppressed. People across the galaxy are willing to risk everything for causes they believe in. The question is whether the Council will provide constructive channels for that courage or continue to suppress it until it explodes into violence. Ambassador Zeth Carey stood slowly, his scaled face thoughtful. Captain Chen, the Council has spent 3,000 years building a system that prevents the kind of chaos that individual action can create. You're asking us to deliberately reintroduce controlled chaos into that system. Ambassador, I'm asking the Council to recognize that chaos already exists. The only question is whether it will be controlled chaos within the system or uncontrolled chaos outside the system. The independence movements and rebel factions spreading across the galaxy prove that people will take individual action whether the Council approves or not. I'm offering a way to channel that action constructively. The debate continued for hours, with representatives arguing passionately on both sides of the proposal. Some saw Sarah's rapid response corps as a dangerous erosion of collective authority. Others saw it as a necessary evolution in galactic governance. But, as the discussion progressed, something interesting began to emerge. Representatives who had been bitter enemies in previous council sessions found themselves agreeing on the need for some mechanism to address the growing independence movements. Even those who opposed Sarah's specific proposal acknowledged that the status quo was no longer sustainable. Finally, Speaker Yorthani called for a recess to allow the representatives to consult with their governments. As the chamber emptied, Sarah found herself alone with Ambassador Zeth Carey. Captain, you've given them a great deal to consider. Whether they accept your proposal or not, you force them to confront the reality that the galaxy is changing. That may be the most important thing you could have accomplished. Sarah looked out at the stars visible through the chamber's great windows. Ambassador, 6 months ago I was just a ship captain trying to save some people in trouble. Now I'm apparently a political revolutionary trying to reshape galactic governance. I never wanted any of this. Captain, greatness is often thrust upon those who least seek it. Your simple act of courage has revealed fundamental flaws in how our civilization operates. Now you have the opportunity to help fix those flaws. And, if I fail? If the Council rejects the proposal and the galaxy slides into chaos anyway? Zeth Carey smiled, an expression that looked strange on his scaled features but somehow conveyed genuine warmth. Captain, you've already succeeded in the most important way possible. You've reminded the galaxy that individual courage matters, that some things are worth risking everything to preserve, and that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to accept failure. Whether the Council accepts your proposal or not, that lesson will endure. As Sarah prepared to leave the chamber, she realized that the ambassador was right. The specific political outcomes mattered, but they were secondary to the larger truth that her mission had revealed. The galaxy had remembered that heroes could still exist, that courage could still triumph over caution, and that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. Whatever happened next, that lesson would spread throughout the stars, carried by every being who had heard the story of the humans who refused to abandon 17 souls in the darkness of the Void Sector. 2 years after the Void Sector rescue, the Galactic Council's new Rapid Response Corps had become something neither its supporters nor its critics had expected. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the RSS Valiant Dawn, the Corps' flagship, watching as rescue teams prepared for their 15th mission of the month. The Rapid Response Corps had grown from Sarah's initial proposal into a force of over 3,000 volunteers from 47 different species. They operated with cutting-edge equipment, extensive training, and, most importantly, the authority to act swiftly in emergency situations without waiting for the complex approval processes that had paralyzed previous Council rescue efforts. Their success rate was extraordinary. In 2 years of operation, the Corps had completed over 400 rescue missions with a 97% success rate. They had saved thousands of lives in situations that would have been written off as hopeless under the old system. But, success had brought its own challenges. Captain Chen, Commander Valarax of the Hegemony approached, his 4 arms carrying multiple data tablets. The hegemony officer had been one of the Corps' earliest volunteers, inspired by the human demonstration that individual courage could achieve the impossible. We have a problem. Sarah turned from the viewport, immediately alert. In the 2 years since the Corps' formation, she had learned that when experienced officers like Valarax said there was a problem, it usually meant something that could reshape galactic politics. What's the situation, Commander?
The Outer Rim colonies are requesting Corps intervention in the Tartarus system. There's been a reactor failure on the mining station, and 60,000 people are trapped. Standard evacuation would take weeks, but the reactor will go critical in approximately 96 hours.
Sarah nodded grimly.
Industrial accidents were becoming increasingly common in the Outer Rim as colonies pushed the boundaries of safe expansion to meet resource demands from the inner systems. The Corps had handled dozens of similar situations.
What's the problem?
That sounds like a standard evacuation mission, just on a larger scale than usual.
Valarax's expression darkened.
The problem is that the Tartarus system is claimed by both the Federation Alliance and the Zephyrian Empire. They've been disputing ownership for 6 months, and both governments have explicitly stated that they will consider any unauthorized intervention in the system to be an act of war. Sarah felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. The Corps had been designed to operate above political considerations, to save lives regardless of governmental disputes. But this situation threatened to drag them into the kind of military conflict they had been created to avoid.
Have either government requested our assistance?
Negative. Both sides are claiming that they have the situation under control and that Corps intervention is unnecessary. But our intelligence suggests that neither side actually has evacuation capability sufficient for the scale of the emergency.
Sarah walked to the tactical display that dominated the center of the observation deck. The Tartarus system appeared as a three-dimensional hologram, with the mining station highlighted in ominous red. Show me the political situation.
The display shifted to show the disputed region of space, with Federation and Empire territories marked in different colors. The Tartarus system sat directly on the border between them, its rich mineral deposits making it a prize that neither side was willing to concede.
Both governments have sent military fleets to the system, Valarax continued.
They're not engaging each other directly, but there have been several incidents of what both sides call defensive positioning.
Any Corps ships entering the system would have to navigate between hostile fleets that are already on edge.
Sarah studied the display, her mind racing through the tactical and political implications.
The Corps had been granted extraordinary authority to act in emergency situations, but that authority had never been tested in a situation where two major galactic powers were on the brink of war. What's the timeline on the reactor failure? 96 hours until critical overload.
After that, the explosion will destroy the station and render the entire system uninhabitable for approximately 2,000 years. 60,000 people will die, and one of the richest mining systems in the galaxy will become a radioactive wasteland. The weight of those numbers settled on Sarah like a physical burden.
60,000 lives. An entire star system. The kind of catastrophe that would be remembered for millennia. Commander, what's the official position of Corps Command?
Valarax hesitated, and Sarah knew the answer before he spoke.
Admiral Korath believes we should wait for governmental authorization before proceeding.
The risk of triggering a war between the Federation and the Empire is too great to justify independent action. Sarah closed her eyes.
Admiral Korath, the former warrior clan leader who had joined the Corps in its early days, was one of the bravest beings she had ever met. If even he was hesitating, the political situation must be extraordinarily dangerous.
But 60,000 people were going to die in 4 days if no one acted. Commander, prepare the rescue fleet for immediate departure.
Alert all Corps ships in the sector to converge on our position. Valarax's four eyes widened in surprise. Captain, Admiral Korath has not authorized independent action. In fact, he specifically ordered all Corps units to await governmental approval before entering the Tartarus system.
Sarah turned to face the commander directly.
Valarax, do you remember why you joined the Corps?
To save lives that others couldn't or wouldn't save.
And how many lives are at stake in the Tartarus system? 60,000, Captain. But, no buts, Commander.
60,000 people are going to die because two governments are more interested in their territorial dispute than in protecting innocent lives. The Corps was created specifically for situations like this, where political considerations prevent appropriate action. Captain Chen, with respect, this is different from our previous missions. We could be starting a war between major galactic powers. Sarah walked back to the viewport, looking out at the stars. Somewhere among them, 60,000 people were going about their daily lives, unaware that they had 4 days to live unless someone chose to risk everything to save them.
Commander, let me tell you what I think will happen if we don't act.
Those 60,000 people will die, the Tartarus system will become uninhabitable, and both the Federation and the Empire will blame each other for the tragedy. The resulting political crisis will probably lead to war anyway, just a war fought over a radioactive wasteland instead of a living system. She turned back to face Valarax. At least if we act, there's a chance we can save those lives before the war starts. And there's even a chance that saving those lives might prevent the war entirely.
How do you figure that, Captain?
Because once we're in the system conducting rescue operations, both sides will have to decide whether they're willing to fire on core ships to maintain their territorial claims. That decision will reveal what their priorities really are, protecting their political positions or protecting innocent lives.
Valarax considered this for a long moment. And if they choose to fire on us?
Sarah's expression hardened with the same determination that had driven her into the void sector 2 years earlier. Then, the galaxy will see exactly what their governments value most, and they'll have to live with the consequences. But, at least 60,000 people will have a chance to survive. Within 6 hours, the largest rapid response corps fleet ever assembled was moving toward the Tartarus system. 12 rescue ships, 8 support vessels, and 4 escort cruisers, crewed by volunteers from 24 different species. Every member of the fleet knew they were potentially flying into a war zone, but every one of them had volunteered anyway. The political reaction was immediate and explosive. Both the Federation Alliance and the Zephyrian Empire issued formal protests to the Galactic Council, demanding that the Corps be ordered to withdraw.
Several council members called for emergency sessions to discuss Sarah's unauthorized action.
Military commanders on both sides began positioning their forces for potential conflict. But the rescue fleet kept moving. Captain, Lieutenant Yara, the human communications officer, looked up from her station with concern written across her face.
We're receiving transmissions from both Federation and Empire fleets. They're ordering us to leave the system immediately or face appropriate defensive measures. Sarah nodded grimly. Acknowledge their transmissions, Lieutenant.
Inform both fleets that we are conducting humanitarian operations under the authority granted to the Rapid Response Corps by the Galactic Council. We have no territorial interests in this system and will withdraw as soon as all civilians are safely evacuated. Captain, Commander Valarax approached with another data tablet. Admiral Korath is demanding that we return to base immediately.
He's threatening court-martial proceedings if we continue the mission without authorization. Sarah looked around the bridge of the Valiant Dawn, studying the faces of her crew.
Humans, Altarians, hegemony officers, insectoid technicians, even a few Valshanti navigators. Beings from species that had spent millennia learning to be cautious, now risking everything because they had learned to embrace human-style determination.
Commander, send a message to Admiral Korath.
Tell him that the Corps was created to save lives when no one else would act. If he wants to court-martial me for fulfilling that mission, he can do it after we save 60,000 people.
The bridge crew exchanged glances, then began working with renewed focus.
Sarah realized that her words had crystallized something for them.
They weren't just following orders anymore, they were choosing to be heroes. As the fleet approached the Tartarus system, long-range sensors detected the military buildups that both sides had deployed.
Federation ships formed a defensive perimeter on one side of the system, while Empire vessels held positions on the opposite side. The mining station sat between them like a pawn in a cosmic chess game. Captain, the sensor operator called out, we're detecting massive energy buildups from both fleets.
It looks like they're powering weapon systems and raising shields. Sarah felt a chill of realization.
Both sides were preparing for battle, and the core fleet was about to fly directly between them.
All ships, this is Captain Chen.
We are entering a potentially hostile situation, but our mission remains unchanged.
We are here to save 60,000 lives, not to fight a war.
If fired upon, we will defend ourselves, but our primary objective is evacuation operations.
Remember that the galaxy is watching us. Whatever we do here today will be remembered for generations. The core fleet crossed into the Tartarus system, and immediately every ship's threat detection systems began screaming warnings.
They were flying through a maze of armed vessels, any one of which could destroy them with a single weapon salvo.
But something unexpected began to happen.
Instead of immediately opening fire, both Federation and Empire fleets began broadcasting challenges and demands, but no one actually pulled the trigger. The political leaders who had ordered this confrontation apparently weren't quite ready to be the first to fire on a humanitarian mission.
All ships, proceed to the mining station, Sarah ordered.
Begin evacuation operations immediately.
The faster we get those people out, the faster we can defuse this situation. As the core ships approached the massive mining platform, Sarah realized they were about to discover whether the galaxy's newest institution could survive its first real test. The Rapid Response Corps had been created to channel individual courage into collective action. Now they were about to learn whether that courage was strong enough to prevent a war. The mining station loomed ahead, its lights flickering ominously as its failing reactor struggled to maintain power.
60,000 people were counting on the Corps to save them. Two major galactic powers were threatening war if the Corps continued.
And Sarah Chen, the human captain who had started this chain of events by refusing to abandon 17 people in the Void Sector, was about to discover whether her vision of institutionalized heroism could survive its ultimate test. The evacuation of Tartarus Station would be remembered as the moment the galaxy discovered what humans truly meant when they spoke of righteous fury. Not the hot anger of violence, but the cold determination to do what was right regardless of the personal cost.
Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Valiant Dawn as her ships began the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history.
60,000 people needed to be evacuated from a failing mining station while two hostile fleets held each other at gunpoint. The Corps had exactly 87 hours before the reactor went critical.
Captain, Lieutenant Yara reported, "We're getting evacuation coordinators online throughout the station."
Initial reports suggest the civilian population is cooperative, but the station's transport systems are badly damaged.
"We're going to need to dock directly with multiple sections."
Sarah nodded grimly. Direct docking meant that core ships would be vulnerable to attack while locked in position. If either fleet decided to open fire, the evacuation ships would have no ability to maneuver defensively.
"Commander Valarax, deploy all available rescue shuttles. I want multiple extraction points active simultaneously."
The faster we move, the less time both sides have to convince themselves that shooting at us is a good idea. As core ships began docking procedures with the massive station, Sarah watched the tactical display show the positions of the surrounding military forces. Federation ships held the outer system perimeter while Empire vessels controlled the inner approaches. The core fleet was operating in the narrow space between them, literally caught in the crossfire of a potential war. "Captain," the communications officer spoke urgently, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Federation flagship.
Admiral Harrison is requesting immediate communication."
Sarah straightened in her command chair. Admiral Harrison was one of the Federation's most experienced commanders, known for both tactical brilliance and political pragmatism. His next words could either defuse the situation or trigger the very war everyone feared.
"Put him through, Lieutenant."
The main screen flickered to show a gray-haired human in Federation uniform, his expression grim but controlled.
"Captain Chen, this is Admiral Harrison of the Federation vessel Democracy's Shield.
I'm ordering you to cease evacuation operations and withdraw from this system immediately." Sarah kept her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the bridge.
"Admiral Harrison, we are conducting humanitarian operations under the authority of the Galactic Council's Rapid Response Corps.
We have no territorial interests in this system and will withdraw once all civilians are safely evacuated."
Admiral Harrison's expression hardened. "Captain, you are operating in disputed space claimed by the Federation Alliance.
Your presence here constitutes a violation of our sovereignty and threatens to escalate an already dangerous situation."
"Admiral, 60,000 innocent people are going to die if we don't evacuate them."
"Surely their lives are more important than territorial disputes." "Captain Chen, I understand your humanitarian motivations, but you don't comprehend the broader strategic situation. This system contains the richest mineral deposits in 3 sectors. Whoever controls it will have significant military and economic advantages. We cannot allow Empire forces to use your evacuation as cover for their own territorial ambitions." Sarah felt the familiar surge of fury that had driven her into the Void Sector, but this time it was tempered by 2 years of experience with galactic politics. She understood the Admiral's position even as she rejected it.
Admiral, I'm not asking you to abandon your territorial claims. I'm asking you not to let 60,000 people die while you pursue them. Once the evacuation is complete, you can resume your standoff.
But, right now, innocent lives are more important than strategic minerals.
Admiral Harrison was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see the conflict playing out across his weathered features. Finally, he spoke again. Captain Chen, the Federation cannot officially sanction your operations.
But, we will not interfere with humanitarian evacuation efforts as long as they remain genuinely humanitarian in nature. Any attempt to establish permanent installations or provide military assistance to Empire forces will be met with immediate response.
Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Understood, Admiral. Our only goal is to save lives.
The transmission ended, and Sarah immediately turned to the communications officer. Lieutenant, try to establish contact with the Empire Fleet Commander. If we can get the same understanding from both sides, we might actually pull this off.
But, before the communication could be established, alarms began blaring throughout the bridge.
The sensor operator's voice cut through the chaos with barely controlled panic.
Captain! The mining station's reactor is destabilizing faster than predicted.
We have maybe 50 hours before critical overload, not 87. Sarah felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. 50 hours to evacuate 60,000 people using ships designed for much smaller rescue operations.
The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. How many people can we evacuate per hour with our current ship deployment? Commander Valarax consulted his data tablet rapidly.
At maximum capacity, assuming perfect efficiency and no delays, approximately 800 per hour.
That gives us a theoretical maximum of 40,000 evacuees before reactor critical. The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Even if everything went perfectly, 20,000 people would still be on the station when it exploded.
Sarah stared at the tactical display, her mind racing through options. She could try to get additional ships from nearby systems, but there wasn't time. She could try to repair the station's failing systems, but the core lacked the specialized equipment necessary. She could try to convince both military fleets to assist with evacuation, but their ships weren't designed for civilian transport. Then, an idea began forming, an idea so dangerous and desperate that it might just work.
Commander Valarax, what's the maximum safe distance from the reactor explosion? Approximately 2 light hours, Captain. Why?
Sarah turned to face her senior staff, her expression set with the same determination that had made her a legend 2 years earlier.
Because we're not going to evacuate the station. We're going to move it.
The bridge erupted in surprised voices and urgent conversations.
Commander Valarax raised his forearms for silence. Captain, the station masses approximately 4 million tons.
Moving it would require tractor beam arrays far beyond what our ships possess.
Not our ships, Commander.
Their ships. Sarah pointed at the tactical display showing the Federation and Empire fleets. Between them, those two forces have enough heavy cruisers and battleships to generate the tractor beam power we need.
Captain Chen, Lieutenant Yara spoke carefully, you're suggesting that we convince 2 hostile military fleets to cooperate in an engineering operation that's never been attempted before?
That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Lieutenant. Both sides claim to care about the people on that station. Now we get to find out if they care enough to work together to save them. Sarah turned to the communications officer. Lieutenant, open channels to both fleet commanders simultaneously. I want to address them at the same time. Within minutes, the main screen split to show Admiral Harrison of the Federation Fleet and Admiral Kithara of the Empire Forces, their expressions ranging from suspicious to openly hostile. Admirals, Sarah began, I'm going to explain a plan that will save 60,000 lives and potentially prevent the war you're both preparing for. But it will require both of your fleets to work together.
Admiral Kithara spoke first, her Empire accent sharp with authority. Captain Chen, the Empire does not collaborate with Federation forces under any circumstances. Admiral Harrison nodded agreement. The Federation's position is identical.
We will not coordinate military operations with Empire forces. Sarah had expected this response, and she was ready for it.
Admirals, you're absolutely right.
Military cooperation between your forces would be inappropriate and potentially dangerous. But I'm not asking for military cooperation.
I'm asking for humanitarian cooperation.
She activated a holographic display showing the mining station and its projected explosion radius.
This station is going to explode in 50 hours.
We can evacuate perhaps 40,000 people before that happens, leaving 20,000 to die. But, if both fleets coordinate their tractor beam arrays, we can move the entire station outside the gravity well to a safe distance where evacuation can continue.
Admiral Harrison frowned.
Captain, even if such an operation were technically feasible, it would require unprecedented coordination between Federation and Empire forces.
The risk of miscommunication or sabotage would be enormous. Admiral, the risk of 20,000 deaths is more enormous. This isn't about politics or territorial control. It's about whether we're willing to work together to preserve innocent life.
Admiral Kithara leaned forward on her screen.
Captain Chan, you ask us to trust each other in an operation that could easily be used to gain tactical advantage. What assurance can you provide that this is not some elaborate Federation strategy?
Sarah looked at both admirals directly, her voice carrying the passion that had inspired the creation of the Rapid Response Corps.
Admirals, I can't provide any such assurance. You'll have to trust each other because 60,000 people are depending on it.
You'll have to put aside your territorial disputes because innocent lives are more important than strategic advantage. You'll have to choose whether you're military commanders who happen to be human, or humans who happen to be military commanders. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute, broken only by the background noise of ongoing evacuation operations.
Finally, Admiral Harrison spoke.
Captain Chen, the Federation fleet will provide tractor beam support for station movement operations, contingent on Empire forces maintaining appropriate distance during the operation.
Admiral Kithara nodded slowly.
The Empire fleet will coordinate tractor beam operations with Federation forces, with the understanding that this cooperation is strictly humanitarian in nature and establishes no precedent for future military collaboration. Sarah felt a surge of hope unlike anything she had experienced since the Void Sector rescue.
Admirals, thank you. We'll coordinate the operation from the Valiant Dawn to ensure neutral oversight.
Commander Valarax will transmit technical specifications for optimal tractor beam positioning.
Over the next 12 hours, the most unlikely cooperation in galactic history began to take shape.
Federation and Empire engineering teams worked through core intermediaries to calculate optimal tractor beam configurations. Warships that had been prepared for battle instead began coordinating their efforts to save a mining station.
The operation itself was a masterpiece of improvised engineering.
47 ships from both fleets positioned themselves around the massive station, their tractor beam arrays synchronizing to create a coordinated pull that would move the entire structure to safety. The slightest miscalculation could tear the station apart, killing everyone aboard instantly. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Valiant Dawn, watching as decades of military rivalry dissolved in the face of shared humanitarian purpose. Federation and Empire officers who had been trained to see each other as enemies were now working together to preserve life.
All stations report ready, Commander Valarax announced. Tractor beam arrays are synchronized and standing by. Begin station movement operation, Sarah ordered. Nice and steady, everyone. 60,000 lives are depending on our precision.
On the tactical display, the massive mining station began to move, slowly at first, then, with gathering momentum as the combined fleet pulled it away from the unstable gravity well that would amplify its reactor explosion. Engineering teams from both sides monitored stress levels and power distribution, making constant adjustments to ensure the station remained intact.
18 hours later, the station reached safe distance just as its reactor finally went critical.
Instead of a devastating explosion that would have destroyed everything within 2 light hours, the reactor failure became a controlled burn that the station's emergency systems could contain.
60,000 people were safe. An entire star system remained habitable.
And 2 military fleets that had been prepared for war had instead cooperated in the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history. As the evacuation operations continued under normal conditions, Admiral Harrison contacted the Valiant Dawn one final time.
Captain Chen, the Federation fleet is preparing to withdraw from the Tartarus system.
Before we depart, I wanted to personally thank you for reminding us what we're supposed to be fighting for in the first place.
Admiral Kithara's transmission followed shortly after. Captain Chen, the Empire fleet is also withdrawing.
Today's operation will not change our territorial positions, but it has changed our understanding of what those positions are meant to protect. As Sarah watched the military fleets depart the Tartarus system, she realized that something fundamental had shifted in galactic politics. Two powers that had been ready for war had instead chosen cooperation. Military forces that had been trained to see each other as enemies had worked together to preserve life. The Rapid Response Corps had not only saved 60,000 people, they had demonstrated that even the most entrenched conflicts could be overcome when faced with shared moral purpose. Ambassador Zeph Carey's transmission reached the Valiant Dawn 3 days later, as the Corps fleet made its way back to home base. Captain Chen, the Galactic Council has voted to make the Rapid Response Corps a permanent institution with expanded authority and funding. Your actions at Tartarus Station have convinced even the most cautious council members that institutionalized courage is not just possible, but necessary. Sarah smiled as she looked out at the stars, thinking about the journey that had brought her from a simple rescue mission in the Void Sector to fundamentally reshaping galactic civilization.
Ambassador, we've learned something important about humans and the galaxy we share.
When people are in trouble, it doesn't matter what species they are, what government they serve, or what flag they salute. What matters is that they need help, and we have the power to provide it. She paused, then added with quiet conviction.
The galaxy called us furious because we refused to accept that some lives were expendable.
They were right about the fury, but wrong about why we feel it.
We're not furious at them.
We're furious at the idea that courage is dangerous, that heroism is naive, that caring about others makes you weak.
And now?
Zeph Carey asked. Now the galaxy is learning that fury properly channeled can save lives, prevent wars, and bring out the best in everyone, regardless of their species.
The humans didn't teach the galaxy how to be furious.
We taught them how to be furious for the right reasons.
As the transmission ended, Sarah Chen looked out at the stars and smiled.
Somewhere among those distant lights, 60,000 people were going about their lives because someone had been furious enough to refuse to abandon them.
Somewhere among those stars, two military fleets were discovering that cooperation could achieve more than conflict.
And, somewhere among those infinite points of light, the next distress call was waiting for someone brave enough to answer it. The furious humans had kept their promise.
They would always answer the call.